Good morning. Oh, good afternoon. Depends where you are. If you happen to be sitting on a beach in Hawaii drinking Bahama Mamas, please have one for me. My name is Tom Gordon. I'm Certified Fellow in Production and Inventory Management by what used to be the American Production Inventory Control Society. But more germane to what we're going to talk about in the next 3 webinars is I've been selecting and implementing ERP systems for quite a long time. Probably before some of you were born, which is really rather sad, isn't it? Okay, so before we start, I want to tell you a story. You've all heard of Icarus, yeah? Icarus and Daedalus, his father, were imprisoned on the Isle of Crete by King Minos. And for some reason they wanted to leave, but they didn't want to wait for the ferry. And any of you who's ever waited for a ferry in the Greek islands know exactly what they were feeling about. So Daedalus invented a system to get them off the island, made 2 sets of wings out of bird feathers and stuck them together with wax. Daedalus understood his system. He escaped Crete, went on to create a career making mazes, I believe. Icarus flew around, full of joie de vivre, flew too close to the sun melted the wax in his wings, and kerplonk, he ended up fish food in the Mediterranean. Lousy aviator, but I'm sure a first-class entree for the fish. The moral of this story, and it's called the Icarus paradox, is understand your system, understand your processes. And I think that is the key to implementing a good ERP system. So I talk about it as a bridge over troubled waters, or it might even be something to jump off. It depends on how well you implement it. This series of webinars is based upon the law of diffusion of innovation, the why, the how, and the what. This webinar is about the dream. Why would you do it? The next webinar is about how you realize the dream, the plan. And the third webinar is how you realize the plan. Now, APICS, or American Association of Supply Chain Management, claim that about 95% of ERP implementations either fail or at the best offers a satisfying solution. A satisfying solution is one that kind of sort of works. As one of my ex-students said to me about their implementation, we've kind of domesticated it, but we haven't tamed it. It's a satisfying solution. This series of webinars address a frightening and costly statistic and are based, as I said, on the law of diffusion of innovation. So let's talk a little bit about the rubbish we create. 95% of the time, 95% of ERP implementations do not meet their expectations. And think about the cost. And the cost is something like this. The Association of Supply Chain Management, as I said, reckon about 95% fail. The British Computer Society, a little bit more optimistic, they reckon about 90% fail. But the fact of the matter is, there's about $3 trillion worldwide spent on systems that do not work. And in the worst case analysis, they actually close your business. So it is a big problem for a lot of people. And this is what we're trying to address with the theory of diffusion of innovation. So, as the great Robert Burden said, the best laid schemes of mass and men gang after glare, and leers not but grief and pain for promised joy. If we leap into an ERP system, we've got to think about the pain that it'll cost us. And mainly we've got to think about the money pit. Many system implementations, many people, the organization is a reality. It is a money pit. They create lots of algorithmic activity, people creating Excel spreadsheets and this sort of stuff to to feed the computer, which is totally non-value added activity. So why would you spend all this money on something that can cause disruption and low morale? It's a good question, and you've got to ask yourself this. Why would we do it? Well, before you really get into the weeds about that, if you have a system already and you're thinking of changing because your current system is not performing to your satisfaction, I should like you to ask yourself a question. If we can't get this system to work, why do we think we can change it and get another system to work? It's a wee bit of a problem. And many people just leap into this and think, well, if we change the system, people will do it and people will work at it. But it doesn't work like that. It really doesn't. Now, the first thing you've got to consider is what is your manufacturing environment? Today, you may be an engineer to order, you may be manufacturer to order, assemble to order, or manufacture to stock. You've got to determine what your environment is, because before you start even thinking about implementing an ERP system, you've really got to understand your environment. Don't fall foul to the Icarus paradox. Don't end up fish food. But not only today you've got to think about, what are your plans for tomorrow? A good implemented ERP system will give you a competitive edge. Your business should grow, and we'll talk about that later. But the fact of the matter is, you may realize it can go from an ETO environment to an MTO environment, or even a assemble to order environment when you get a much more sophisticated bill of material processor and what have you. So you've got to think about where we want to go tomorrow. So the first thing to do is a force field analysis. Today, your organization is in the middle. Yesterday doesn't matter. We can't worry about tomorrow based upon yesterday. We've got to think ahead. But what is that tomorrow going to be? Is it going to be a sunrise or is it going to be a sunset? So we've got to figure out where we want to be. Now, the force field analysis is very powerful because it forces you to think objectively about reasons to change and reasons not to change. And if the reasons not to change outweigh the reasons to change, then you'll get a sunset rather than a sunrise. Jack Welch pointed out that the rate of change outside the organization, that if the rate of change outside the organization is greater than the rate of change inside the organization, then you have a problem. Change is with us all the time. Immanuel Kant said the only permanent thing is change. And if we live in a changing universe, we've got to accept change. But we've got to plan for it, and we've got to make sure that the change is sensible. So, what will an ERP system do for you? Eliminate islands of automation. Eliminate silos. Most organizations are like rivers. If you think about the process of taking a customer order and getting the money into the bank, what happens in between? Well, in a river, you have wide bits, you have narrow bits, you have rocks, you have shoals, all that sort of stuff. A good ERP system will help you change the river into a canal. The purpose of a canal is to move something from A to B as efficiently as possible. And that's what you want your ERP system to do. It'll eliminate redundant data entry. How many times do you create data of the same thing? What we want really is a one-stop shop. We want a database where we can put all our data into the same database and everybody has access to it. So by doing this, we can reduce institutionalized waste, re-engineering the key processes in preparation for implementation, for instance, value stream mapping, which we'll talk about in webinar 2, establishing the best practice. This is something top management should be doing, improving the workflow and efficiency. Customer relationship management. Why are we in business? We're in business to service the customer because the customer pays our wages, yeah? So any system you implement has got to make sure that this customer does not suffer. So you've got to determine the customer requirements and the relationship. If any of you took our webinars a couple of weeks ago, we talked about strategic relationships with suppliers. A good ERP system will allow you to create a strategic alliance with your customers and, of course, your suppliers. And this will give you a ginormous edge over the competition. One of the big advantages of a totally integrated database system, which includes finances, of course, you make sure that the financial systems are coherent and transparent. How long does it take you at the end of the period to get your financial reports? 10 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, sometime never. Well, a good ERP system, if it's done properly, collecting all the data from one place, there's no reason why the financial period shouldn't finish at 12 midnight and you have the results at 8 o'clock in the morning. No reason whatsoever. And the other big advantage of an integrated database is you can ad hoc reports. Most ERP systems have a series of standard reports, which everybody uses, you know, like horizontal MRP reports. But occasionally you want to dig into the data and find something. And a good ERP system with a good basic database will allow you to do this. However, what will an ERP system do for you? As the little imp on the bottom right says, but only if you do it right, begorra. It will not help you if you don't implement it properly. But the main benefit, all that tribal knowledge. There is a fantastic amount of real data in the organization and in its people. The hard part is getting the data to the decision makers and the decision takers. The nice thing about the vast majority of modern ERP systems is that they support business intelligence dashboards, presenting data in a readily acceptable and understandable format. I remember a long time ago saying to my computer manager, this is what I need to know at 7 o'clock each morning. These are the fires I need to put out so that I can put them out and then I can get on with the real job of being the plant manager. This is what you use the data for. So you know where you are and how you're going to improve. And a good database system will allow you to do this. So, is technology the answer? Well, it's a moot point, really. An effectively implemented ERP system can be an incredibly positive addition to the organization's toolbox. But, and it's a big but, where are the duck eggs hiding? If you do not implement it in an effective way, it's going to cost you an awful lot of money and time. So some of the advantages. Well, APICS, or the Association for Supply Chain Management, as we term it now, brought out some good figures. A well-implemented system, one of the 5%, reduction in operating costs. How do you do that? Well, you eliminate the silos. You have a canal rather than a river. Reduction in administrative costs, 28%. How do you do this? Because you only use data once. You put it in once in the system, and then it's available to everybody. People don't have to create spreadsheets and all that sort of stuff. Manpower redeployment, and I do not mean manpower elimination or redundancy. I mean redeploying skilled manpower into other areas of the business, getting rid of all the algorithmic activity that people do, and making sure that your people are thinking heuristically. And they reckon about 12 full-time employees can be shifted from all these mindless algorithmic tasks to thinking about the business. Time to close the end of period accounts, about 5 hours. It's useless not having the financial accounts for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. You want them 8 o'clock the next morning to start the new financial period. And how long does it take? Well, this is not a silver bullet. You have to work at it. It can take typically about 15 months, the implementation period of a good system. Because think what you're doing. You're creating a virtual world in the database. And from that virtual world, you can take decisions for the real world. So you've got to do it right. There's a lot of stuff to do. Legacy data, restructuring bills of material, getting the inventory right, for goodness sake. So, typical of the 95% that fail, what does it cost? Well, even a poor system will help you reduce operating costs. It'll help you get rid of some of the barriers, some of the rocks and shoals in your river. However, your administrative costs will probably rise about 2% because your people have got to feed the ERP system, rather like a mother bird feeding worms to the chicks. So you're going to increase your administrative costs. You're going to increase your manpower. And typically about 3 full-time employees who have to nurse this system along. Time to close end of period accounts, probably generally about 5 days. Now, the reason for this is that the accounting period people are the more disciplined in your business. I mean, they've been doing it the same way since 1492, haven't they? So it makes sense that they can grasp the accounting systems a lot quicker than perhaps anybody else. So reducing and the closing the financial period, typically about 5 days. How long does it take you to do all this? About 27 months. So it's a long time. And think what is happening in those 27 months. Your people are going to be massaging data. They're going to be fiddling about with stuff, and it's not very efficient. So think about a positive use of data. The Boeing 787 generates an awful lot of data in flight, awful lot of data. And it's all downloaded into the Boeing cloud. So should any component fail or operate subpar, then when the plane lands, the technicians are there with the spare parts. They've got advance notice. This is a real positive use of data. So this is some of the advantages if you get your data right. But let's talk about this for a moment. In my lifetime, we've gone from 80-column punch cards to accessible data. The black and white picture in the middle of the slide is the computer room of what used to be the computer room of a fairly prestigious university. In the bottom picture, massive great computer, ICL 1904E, I think it was called. Massive great things. You could hold a party inside it. The thing in front of it is the line printer. One of these machines that generate miles and miles and miles and miles of line flow paper. So basically the machine was a giant typewriter. And how did we feed it? Well, you created your data, then someone else, the data prep department, had to put the data onto 80-column punch cards. They went into the computer room. The operators invariably, particularly if they were a bit bored with you and you didn't like you, they used to drop your cards or shuffle them. So you never really knew where you were. It's changed. My little laptop is much more powerful than that massive thing in the corner. This is evolution. The dynamic evolution of the computer system, particularly in manufacturing, over the last 50 or so years would have amazed Charles Darwin. Imagine in the 1940s, except for some very specialized applications, code breaking and that sort of stuff, the computer was just a giant typewriter, particularly going till the end of the 60s, churning miles and miles of green paper out. closeted by the high priesthood of operators, working 7/24 most of the time, and DP managers, of course, in flowery ties and so on. So that's really evolution. This business has changed. So let's look at the standard model. All systems, all changes, you should think about the strategy. You should have a business strategy. You want it to go out 5, 10, 15, 20 years, depending upon what you need. You might need new equipment. You might even need a new factory. So you've got to have a strategy. Now, you've got to have a way of translating this strategy into tactical requirements. The strategy will be sales operations planning, financial planning, HR planning, don't forget the people, but you've got to translate this into a tactical requirement. The tactical requirement then has got to be translated into operational requirements. Now, at each stage of the game, you've got to make sure that you can do it. Business strategy, sales and operations planning, you pass across resource requirements planning. It'll tell you if you can actually do it. At the tactical level, we do rough cut capacity planning, which will tell us if we can actually do it in that particular period. At the operational level, we have capacity requirements planning, which will tell us if we can do it today. So this model, and you'll notice that all the arrows go backwards and forwards. No model, no plan is perfect. In fact, the great General Eisenhower said, as soon as the first bullet is fired, the plan is obsolete. What he advocated was the planning process. If you remember, D-Day took over a year to plan. And, of course, it almost failed because of the weather. So the planning process is what gives you success. If you just create a business plan, have it nicely typed, have a couple of pretty pictures, and then put it on a shelf, that's silly. So planning has got to be an iterative process, and a good ERP system will allow you to plan and plan and plan. Now, all ERP systems work. All ERP systems work. The question is, will they work in your environment? It's rather like going into Neiman Marcus to buy a suit. All the suits have got jackets and trousers, but will they fit you? So what do? Do you customize something, which is added cost, or do you go somewhere else? All ERP systems work, but it's rather like the suits in Neiman Marcus, or as people say, needless markup. The question is, will they fit you? And brings me to customization. Do not customize a complex ERP system or anything else. What is the job of the computer salesman? To sell you something. So if you point out that you've got a particularly unique way of doing something, and of course no company has, then they'll say, oh, we can change the software. We can rewrite this bit. It's no problem at all. Well, what you're doing is creating an annuity for the software company. Whatever the computer salesman tells you, take with a grain of salt. Iron perite is not gold, however much it looks like gold. So some of the key guiding principles. I reiterate on the bottom line the ability to handle planned growth. Do not buy a system which will only last you for a couple of years. This is a big investment. You want something which will grow with your company. So you've got to ask yourself, how accessible is it? How accessible is it going to be to all your people who need that information? How will it grow? Is this system scalable? Is the system effectiveness? Is it effective? Is it efficient? Will it meet the return on investments that you're expecting? What about maintenance and lifetime support? If you buy from one company and expect another company to implement it and support it, how do you know they've got the expertise and the current knowledge to do that? You should think about an ROI. You want a cost-effective solution. You don't want to spend a lot of money on something that will not work, but you've got to establish what you're expecting. You've got to establish a return on investment. And then, of course, legacy data. What do we do about all the tribal knowledge? How do we get this data out of people's heads? And as I said earlier, this is the big benefit of an ERP system in an organization, because people leave, people drop dead, people inherit money and go and sit on the beach in the Cayman Islands, and they don't really care about your business anymore. So you have got to get all their information, all their data, and reiterate, the system has got to be able to handle planned growth. No discussion at an executive level about ERP would be complete without the benefit of Ollie White, recognizing the contribution of Ollie White. Most people of my age owe a great deal of debt to Ollie. Our first exposure generally was through his training courses. He died in 1983 at the age of 53, but he lived his dream passionately. His dream was data, data, data. Do it properly, do it effectively. And he lived his dream. Now, Ollie, his basic principle was keep it simple. There was no flannel, no sales pitch, just a presentation of reality, which helped many companies go forward. Now, a good way to evaluate your systems, particularly after you've implemented one, is to use the Ollie White Class A checklist. Before you start, talk to your Missouri Enterprise ABM about a system health check. This is a day's work. It's a checklist which we've developed, and it'll give you an idea of really what you have to look out for. But once you've invested in the system and you've implemented the system, then you really need to turn to Ollie White's checklist for business excellence. It classifies implementations in 4 ways. A Class D implementation it's just a toy, it's just a video game. Keeps the operators in the computer room busy. A Class A is something that really earns you money. And remember Ellie Goldratt, if it doesn't make you money, don't do it. So what are some of the things we need to think about? The order of battle. I apologize for the picture of John Locke at the bottom. He's one of my heroes. Him and Thomas Jefferson probably thought along the same lines. Getting rid of the nonsense. So the bottom thing is the software. The software is a tool. It's not a solution. It's a tool to help you organize your data, collecting your data, making sure that your data is valid. And the very top, of course, your people. If your people don't do it, if your people don't buy into it, if your people don't use it properly, then it's all a waste of time. And of course, before you give anybody any kind of tool, you've got to train them to use it. ERP is just like anything else. So, creating the dream, top management. This webinar really is aimed at top management. We cover the implementation and selection in the next 2 webinars. So top management have got to decide what their dream is. Now, creating the dream, management gets what management inspects, not what they expect. Most change systems fail because management loses focus. They've got other things to do. They've got to go out with customers and drink martinis and olives. That they can't afford to be messing about and focusing on change in the organization. So if top management loses focus on this process, on the dream, then it is going to fail. So how do you create the dream? What does top management do? Well, the Association of Supply Chain Management, I still think of it as APIX. I've been a fellow of APIX for getting on for 24 years now, so I still think of APIX as APIX. But they've got a great mini course, Introduction to ERP. It's a seeding class. Basically, it tells top management what to expect and what not to expect. And then top management wants to know what they want, wants to know how to get it. They've got to keep focus. They've got to drive the changes. The changes got to be real data. You do not focus on opinion or wishful thinking. We've got to think about the total cost of ownership. How much is this going to cost us? What is the return on investment? And please, 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 any of you who are thinking of changing systems, before you do anything else, think about the safeguards for cybersecurity. If you are dependent on the ERP system or any other system you're dependent upon and it's unavailable, you're really up the creek without the proverbial paddle. So data security, cyber security, think about it 1,000,000 times, please. You must plan for this. You must have a disaster recovery plan, which is part of your strategic plan. You must establish it. You must rehearse it. You must practice it. You must document the results and you must improve it. If you don't do this, sooner or later, you're going to be hacked or be subject to ransomware. Think about the controls before you go into it. So, what is the purpose of any business system? Take the customer order and get the green folding stuff to put in the bank. That is what business systems are for. Ellie Goldratt said, if it doesn't make you money, don't do it. It's just a toy. And how many businesses, particularly today, with a shortage of people, can afford to implement a toy? None of us. So think about it. So some of the reasons why you end up with a money pit. Seeing the software as a solution. Getting fascinated with technique. Remember Ollie White, keep it simple. Don't get fascinated with technique. You know, you might have lots of pretty pictures and graphs. Do they mean anything? Forgetting people and forgetting their daily work. It's a big problem if you do not realize that job one is satisfying the customer. Job two is then implementing your new system. And do not try to implement multiple changes at the same time, because this is big stuff. Unreal expectations. If I had $1,000 for every time a salesman said to me, oh, Tom, it'll pay for itself in 6 months or 3 months or something, I would be quite a rich person. Unreal expectations. Ask why. How does it do it? Prove it. Give us some results. Inadvisable advisors. Do not have anybody advising you who've never done it before. It's not an area where a neophyte can, with a bit of luck, get it right. Inadvisable advisors. You need advisors who understand your business, who understand that you can't fly too near the sun, otherwise your wax wings will melt, and who have done it before. Ignorance. If you think education is expensive, well, try the cost of ignorance. Train, train, train. Develop people. Make sure that they're on board and that they know what they're doing. And the seductive patter of salespeople, especially when the talk of customization. It's said the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It is not. It is paved with frozen computer salespeople, and little imps can play ice hockey on them in the winter. Do not be conned into thinking you can customize easily a big system like this. Parameterize, yes. Customize, absolutely no. And then top management. One of the big problems is top management really don't know what they want from a system. With apologies to Aristotle, I've got a management syllogism. We must do something, this is something, therefore we must do it. How many times do management think, oh, we've got to do this? You've got to think about it. So, some of the big problems for top management, and this is managing change in any organization, any kind of change. Poor leaders don't know how to lead change. Unless you've been living in a hole with a hobbit for the last 30 years, you've probably been exposed to all kinds of methodologies. Do they work? Well, some do. But remember what Deming said, what works in one place won't necessarily work in another. Poor leaders don't understand that leadership is about people. Management is about money. And we're talking about leadership at the moment. So poor leaders assume change is easy. Yeah, we can do that, no problem. Not at all. People don't like change. Poor leaders believe a good idea will succeed every time. Poor leaders think that the people below them on the totem pole will be so astounded by their brilliance they want to go along with it. Kind of like Napoleon saying to his million-man army, come on, lads, let's go to Moscow. It's nice this time of the year. And everybody tramped around following him. Poor leaders try and force change. A president of a company who tried this explained to me the problems that he had. People used all kinds of excuses and resources to avoid change. Poor leaders prioritize how over the why. Prioritizing the how over the why. Even well-meaning leaders can think to themselves, well, we must do this, we must do it quickly. Poor leaders ignore the overall context. They ignore the fact that we have got a business to run. Don't understand the business. Poor leaders don't understand resistance. Poor leaders don't understand that they're people with vested interests in the existing system. Poor leaders go into the game without a game. What I mean by this is many people, a poor leader, will practice climbing on a climbing wall on a cruise ship and then think they can go and climb the north wall of the Eiger. It doesn't work like that. And finally, the organization is immune to change. You've got the barriers to change. We tried this in 1937 and didn't work. Why fix something that is not broke? So these are some of the big problems that we have with management. Available free from Missouri Enterprise is a little booklet called Leading Effective Change, a handbook for those who go where angels fear to tread, and angels fear to tread change. So warning from experience. A mountain to climb when considering ERP is often not top management. It is the middle management naysayers. Watch out for their insecurities and their almost insurmountable abilities to create roadblocks. You get to the top of the little mountain where the blue arrow is, and then all of a sudden you see this massive great mountain in front of you. It is not a happy place to be. So, to wrap up, important first steps. Determine the competitive advantage. Why you want to do this. Get an objective return on investment. You've got to make money out of this. It is a tool. You wouldn't buy an incredibly expensive laser welding system and not train people to use it, or not have the electricity to drive it. Set the priority. The first priority in any business is the customer. The next priority, if you're implementing an ERP system, is the ERP system. Do not be tempted to implement lots of other systems at the same time. And we're going to talk about this a lot in webinar number 2. Communicate the executive commitment. If the executive management do not show that they're committed to it, why should people do it? Why should they follow it? And the way to do this is to establish a cross-functional steering committee. A cross-functional steering committee at all levels in the organization and all ages and experience. You just don't want a steering committee with the people who've been there 40 years because they'll see things differently than the up-and-coming people. So make sure it's cross-functional. Then educate the committee. The Association of Supply Chain Management, I keep wanting to call it the American Production Inventory Control Society, I'm sorry. Their certification certificates are absolutely too valuable to ignore. Once you've educated the committee, then create a project charter. Project sponsor should be a member of executive management. The project charter can be used to create a realistic project plan. If you do not have a realistic project plan, you don't get anywhere. If you don't have a realistic plan, you don't end up in the beach in Hawaii, you end up in the snow in Paola, Kansas. Have a realistic plan of how to get there. And make sure it is realistic, bearing in mind people have jobs to do. And finally, specify the criteria for success and the death threats. Or as the old Leonardo da Vinci said, start with the end in mind. It's always a good idea. And then try and think about what can go wrong and try and mitigate those black swans in your organization. So I'd like to pass now to one of my colleagues, and she is going to talk about the next step and also talk about the survey and everything. So thank you very much for listening to me. And now you get a little bit of pleasure by talking to Kaylee. Thank you.
Hey everybody, so as you can see on the screen, it says, thank you for participating, but, please be sure to join us next Thursday from September 16th, is 11 to noon again. So it'll be the second part of the ERP series, how to plan for your ERP journey. So I sent a link in the chat for you all to complete a survey. We'd really appreciate it if you would take a couple of minutes to fill that out. Your feedback's important to us. It helps us help you better and kind of see where our manufacturer's at and how we can, best provide services for you all and keep doing what we do best. So we really appreciate you joining us today. If there's anything anybody needs, reach out to your local ABM, or Tom can help you at any point in time. So we really appreciate you joining us today. If there's no questions, feel free to ask any. If there aren't any, then we'll go ahead and close out for the day, but we really appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Kaylee, I'm not seeing the link to the survey.
Oh, okay. Is it there now?
There we go. Thank you, ma'am.
All right, sorry.
Please feel free to unmute your mic if you have any questions you'd like to ask Tom specifically about your ERP journey.
Why did PowerPoint cross the road to get to the next slide? Death by PowerPoint, yeah?
I love it. I love it. I love it.
No questions?
Okay, that one I'm going to have to remember.
Has anyone got any stories about their implementations?
Rob Rolls posted earlier, I have no major issue with ours except for the cost. Thus, I'm interested in learning about other options.
Well, cost is a very important part. And as I said earlier, you don't go into this unless you've got a clear idea of the return on investment that you're going to expect. There's a lot of data about the benefits, and I gave you some initially. There's a lot more data available, and we can talk about that. We're planning to produce a little bit of a booklet termed, where is it? A Confusing Guide to ERP. How to implement an ERP system without tearing your hair out. That is available. We talk about some of the benefits. And also, the other booklet I mentioned was Leading Effective Change in the Organization. Please do not go into any kind of major change without A, the end in view, the ideal final result, as they say in TRIZ, and without a return investment plan. That should be one of the things that you want to make sure. But it is expensive, absolutely. And this is why you think about accessibility. Do you want to source it locally? Do you want to have it in the cloud? How many users are you going to have? Do you have one, for instance, terminals on the shop floor? All this sort of stuff. You've got to really do some analysis. And this is where the value stream map comes in. And we'll talk about this next week in great detail. Don't, in my opinion, you shouldn't embark on any major changes or any major investments without doing a value stream map into your organization, figuring out how all the bits fit together.
Yeah, if there's no other questions or any comments, then I guess we'll go ahead and let you go for the day. We appreciate you all joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.